My name is Megan O'Neill. I'm here out from California. Came to chill with you guys for a little bit. I work for a company called Procore, and we do construction technology. Tell me if this mic is crapping out a little bit. And basically, what construction technology is, we do the full stack of basically what it takes to build a building. So everything from financials to drawings and everything in between. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, let me know. And I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. Thank you. So what is Make It Spectacular aside from a very punny name? It's basically about the small little things that we could do every day to speed up how long it takes for us to write a test. So a lot of talks talk about how can we speed up this particular test, how can we speed up our testing suite in general, but we don't often look at the human factor of testing, which is how can we write this test a little bit faster. And spoiler alert, what it comes down to is communication, communication through code, and having a little bit of developer empathy. So how can we write something today that makes sense to ourselves tomorrow, makes sense to a new developer, or just someone from a different team? Thank you. All right, this one seems a little bit better, maybe. So I recently started working at Procore maybe about 6 months ago, and dove right into a huge monolith. And so the testing suite there had a lot of contextual knowledge, lots of different ways of writing tests. So that was one experience. And then my team started working on a service. So we got to build out the testing suite from scratch and kind of do things how we wanted to do it this time. So kind of looking at both of those situations where we already had something in place and we wanted to write something new is how I got to this sort of intersection. So let's dive on into it a little bit. So these are a number of reasons that I have either said and or heard why people do not like testing. Once upon a time, I was not a huge testing fan. I am now reformed. So I've found that testing is super polarizing, right? Everyone's either like, yes, let's TDD this, or shit, I just wrote this feature and now I have to write the tests for it, ugh. And we want to fix that. We want to make it happy, right? Everybody's here, everybody likes writing code, but for some reason, when it comes to writing tests, tests are no longer code, they're tests. So we avoid them. So yeah, testing takes too long, it's not a feature, it's a nightmare to set up. There's 1,000,001 reasons why we try to avoid it. And so the three that I would like to focus on, also, I just want to let you guys know that this is a much nicer orange on my screen, not this awful brown. So the three main reasons that I want to look at that kind of hold us up from testing or make us procrastinate hardcore, right? Go get a coffee or something instead of doing it. First off, the tests are a mess, and we have no idea what the heck's going on. It's taking us a really long time to write a spec for some reason. And the last one is we have no testing suite, so we have to write this bad boy from scratch, which is potentially the most scary one. So situation one, this is a mess. Let's clean it up. So we all know naming is really hard, right? It's like probably one of the most difficult things that we have to do. But it's super important. It makes a huge difference. So one thing that I really like to do is have a one-to-one relationship between the spec name and then the actual thing I'm testing. Spoiler alert, I work on authentication and authorization, so we're going to be looking at a lot of request specs, for better or worse. So in our RSpec describes, right, we have 3 different cases up here. Our first one is just RSpec describe API, which I have definitely seen in our testing suite. So that gives us one piece of info, right? We have an API and we're testing it. We don't know what our API is called. We don't know the version. We don't know anything of what we're actually testing right now. So this developer, whoever they are, has to like actually dig through the file to figure out what's going on. We can't just automatically open it and know, oh, hey, this is the object that's under test. So, right, a couple of extra minutes that we have to spend figuring out what's up. Second example, a little bit better. So we have API users posts. So we still don't know what our API is called, if it's just API or if it's named. We still don't have a version, but we know we're testing a user's posts. What's wrong with this? We don't know if posts are nested underneath user or if user's posts is one object itself. So a little bit more info, but not fabulous. And what I have found that my team generally goes with most of the time is the bottom case, because it's kind of the most descriptive, right, and looks nicely namespaced in a way that kind of makes sense to us. So in the bottom example, we know that our API is just straight up called API. Very exciting. It's version 1, and we're dealing with our post controller that's nested underneath our users. So like this seems super simple and really tiny, but it makes a huge difference. By just changing the name of something, you've just enabled the developer to jump in there and know exactly what's being tested, and you've saved them a couple seconds. So it's all of these tiny little differences that add up over time, and that's what we're looking at today. So it's the little things in life and in code, apparently. So this is our not so nice looking test example. And sorry about the red, that looks a little rough to read. So super basic tests, we're just saying, okay, as an admin user, that's our context. We have, it looks like 2 users here, user and other user, some really beautiful naming. Looks like one of the users has an admin trait on it. And we're describing, okay, cool, viewing a user's post, and a really beautiful it block, it lets you see posts. So we have some setup, create a bunch of posts, our little get request, and then our expectation. Not beautiful, but like let's keep this in mind as our not so great example, but an example that more often than not we may or may not run across in code. So what are we looking for? What should we be looking for in a better example? So when we have a context block, is there some sort of logical switch, right? So if I'm saying context as an admin user, right underneath I would expect something that says, hey, this is what an admin user is for my application. Or if our context is with an invalid token, what does that look like? What makes it an invalid token? Anytime we're deviating from what's considered the norm, we should be defining what that behavior actually is so that we don't have to go crazy kind of searching for it. Naming. Do we have nicely named things? Do we have user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That doesn't really mean anything. Do we have user Bob, Susie, Mary, Dave? Also does not mean anything. Maybe we should look at like admin user, standard user, guest user, if we're looking at our blog post example. Super basic things again, but like a name can make all the difference. It makes it so much easier to read. For our describe block, do we actually know what's being tested, or do we have just like a weird little sentence there that may or may not mean something to you? And formatting, can we actually read this thing? Has anyone ever read a post, a blog, a book, any sort of written material and said, I think this would look better with no line breaks? Probably not. So maybe let's not write our test that way too. Just an idea. So let's look at a little bit better of an example. So first off, oh my God, I could actually read this one. My eyes are not bleeding. Improvement already. Our context, again, admin user, and then underneath we have it nicely defined. Hey, okay, we have an admin user. Great. So your eyeballs can just scan that real quick, and you have an idea of what's actually happening. For describe blocks, I generally like to use that and just either put the method in there or the endpoint that we're testing. That kind of gives you a quick go-to. Great, I know exactly what's being described here. I know exactly where I could go in the code to see what's actually happening. And then big fan of just throwing a subject block in there. So for our it block, it displays all the posts for the specified user. So a little bit better than our other one. And then we have our setup and everything in there again. So that is part of the 4-phase test, which I have a nice little link that Thoughtbot has. So basically there's 4 pieces inside of there. The first, that create a bunch of posts method, is our setup. The second part is our actual subject, what's being tested. Our third part is the actual expectation itself. And then the fourth part would be the teardown of the test, which this is already taken care of for us. So that kind of helps break things up a little bit. And obviously this is a really small example, but once things start to get a bit more complicated, it just kind of makes sense to logically separate these things. The end goal is kind of, can I have a team member from a different team sit next to me and understand exactly what's being tested without them knowing the part of the application that is being tested intimately? So, right, Ruby reads really nicely like English, so our test should as well. Scenario number 2. This is taking forever. So there are 1,000,001 reasons why a test might take you forever to write. I'm gonna deal with a really unpopular one, and we're all gonna cringe, and it's okay, we'll get there together. But it's the scary part called writing documentation, everyone's favorite. So our main application typically has a README, and if you think to your README, what do we have for testing? It's probably like, hey, this is how you run your testing suite, you're golden, carry on. But our testing suite is basically an application in and of itself, right? It's describing what our application should be doing. It's an intricate little beast, special snowflake, so maybe we should document it a little bit more, give it some love. So, ideal things to put in there to save everyone some time. What do you actually use for testing, right? Like, what tools are in this testing suite that are being used? You know, maybe it's FactoryBot, Capybara. Do you have JavaScript tests going on? Everything that you have in there, slap it in that bad boy. We have a bunch of our spec custom matchers that are not like inherently discoverable unless you're kind of digging through and looking for them. So also a really nice thing to put in there. Like, hey, these are these tools that we've written because these cases come up a ton. So let's nicely document them so we could use them to even step it up a notch. Really cool if you add a little example, like, hey, this is how this matcher is used. More often than not, I see in code review, like, oh, why don't you use this custom matcher? And then someone's like, oh, I didn't know we had that. You know, documentation. Is there any extra setup that you need to do to get certain specs running, right? Maybe you have some weird mailer setup. Maybe some tests don't run nice locally. Also, really great things to document. We have, I know there's like one test that I could think of particularly that just does not run nicely due to collation issues on our DB. So that's like in a nice little note right above the test, but if you're just trying to run your spec, that's not popping up, and you're gonna spend like 2 hours trying to run through this, like, oh my God, I've broken it, what did I do? I didn't even touch this thing, and you did not do anything. So if you have weird like little special snowflake tests, write it down, address that, save someone like 3 hours. It's really nice, right? Because you're helping them help themselves. They could carry on with their entire developer flow, and then they don't have to ask you, hey, why does this thing not work? What have I done? And then you don't remember why this doesn't work either. And then you're pair programming 2 hours later, and you're like, oh shit, this is why, right. Write it down, it happens to everyone. We all know we're gonna do it at some point. Do you use any common examples, right? So since I work at a construction company, maybe I have Bob the Builder company that's used all over the application. So like write that bad boy down, that's something we use really frequently, and that's a happy example we like. Little stuff like that. And lastly, obviously how to run your testing suite. So again, tiny little things that you could do, like you could probably bang out a PR while I'm still up here talking, and it would help your testing suite already. And our last case, oh my God, I need to build everything. Our testing suite is brand new. That's usually how I feel about that. So sadly, I cannot build your factories for you, so you're going to have to panic about that on your own. But what we do have that helps out a little bit at Procore is we have a gem called Circumstance that we just open sourced. Fair warning, that name might change, TBD. It's a little bit new. It was internal to us for a bit, and now we were like, yeah, this is a really great thing. Let's pop it on out to the Ruby community. So basically, it allows you to share setup between specs. So instead of having to write like, let admin user equal this, let's write these posts for every single test every single time, we could just do it once and reuse it over and over again. And it's so nice, it's so clean, makes your life a little bit better. So literally, this is pretty much all you have to do aside from installing the gem and requiring it. So we're going to define a scenario, and we'll call it Procore blog. You could load other scenarios inside of a scenario, so scenario inception. And just slap your factories in there. It works. It's beautiful. Then we pop on over back to our request spec. In the top, we load our scenario, and you are golden. So easy to use. I'm a big fan. I feel like it saves me a ton of time. One thing to keep in mind, though, if you're kind of writing some tiny examples, maybe don't define a really big scenario and then include it because you're going to load all of those objects, and we probably don't want to do that. Let's see. So yeah, that is the very speedy run-through. I feel like I went through that kind of fast. But if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, maybe bang out a PR real quick, help your fellow devs out, and that's it.